Chapter 15. A Fishing Expedition. Soledad asked for a few days off because a group of Indians were going fishing. We could come too, she said, if we liked. Any chance to be with the Indians and hear the language I seized, and I told her we would come. She gave us directions to reach the spot where everyone was to meet. Just down this trail. Keep going straight until you come to some houses. About 3 hours. Tomorrow at sundown we will all be there. Barbara and I left at 1 o'clock the next afternoon, taking with us Blanco, Barbara's old white horse, loaded with my saddlebags, Barbara's saddlebags, and Vicente. I carried a little red lantern and a pot of soup in one hand, a machete in the other. Barbara led the horse. We walked all afternoon, past the familiar landmarks, past Colorado trails we knew, past the last banana plantation, beyond the wide, well-traveled trail to where it narrowed more and more as we went on. We met a woman who was amazed when we told her where we were going. "Oh, it's very, very far," she told us, and my heart sank, for I knew that the Indians considered 5 miles a short walk. What would a long one be? We came to a fork. Soledad had said, "Keep going straight." Well, there was no way to do that. 1 or 2 clues led us to think that one trail led to an Indian house, so we took that, hoping to spend the night there and perhaps learn the way to the rendezvous point. 7 dogs exploded from the house when we reached the clearing, followed by a shy girl, well painted, dressed in a colored striped skirt, hair uncombed but teeth well blackened. She understood almost no Spanish, and we could not make her understand that we were lost and needed directions. Finally, her father arrived. More paint, less clothing, blacker teeth, but better Spanish. When we tried 6 or 7 ways of asking our questions, he assured us that we were on the right trail and would certainly reach our destination before nightfall. At 6, he said. And I was not sure whether he meant at 6 o'clock that evening or 6 hours from then. It was about 4:30. Again I explained to him that we meant today, before the sun went down, not tomorrow, and he smiled and nodded enthusiastically, "Si, si, 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 si." So we thanked him, which he did not understand at all, and set off once more. Vicente was a jungle encyclopedia. At every turn, he would be pointing out something, telling us to catch something, to pick this leaf or that stick, to look at this bird or that insect, to listen to the toads peeping. We found an odd arrangement of bamboo poles, and he explained that it was put there to catch water. Later, he told us to collect some white sap that smelled of peppermint because it would start a fire. We found that he was right. Insects on the path that we had not seen at all, he had noticed from high up on the horse and warned us about. When the path seemed to peter out altogether, he found it for us, although he had never traveled this way before. The 3 of us took turns riding the horse, and while I was riding, barefooted, because we had been crossing rivers, my foot suddenly began to burn as if a thorn branch had cut across my toes. I paid no attention to it until later in the evening, when I found that the foot was red and swollen, not scratched, and Vicente told me that a caterpillar had stung me. The jungle became thicker and taller as we went, and darker as the sun sank, so that we were finally using a flashlight to watch for snakes and to find the trail. There were occasional hoof marks to reassure us that the Indians had ridden this way before. We hoped they were the same Indians we were looking for and not other ones. Knowing how easy it was to lose the way in daylight, we began to think it would be madness to continue in the dark. But each bend of the trail gave us hope that we would come upon the clearing we were looking for. It got darker, the trail got more indistinct, and we got tired. The jungle was filled with night noises. We had long since left behind us the last habitation when we came to a place where it was impossible to tell which way the trail went, and we knew that the only rational thing to do was to stop. Vicente seemed terrified, but could only tell us in Safiki what it was he feared. Our Safiki vocabulary stopped short of whatever it was that he was telling us. We tied up the horse, lit the little red lantern, spread my nylon poncho on the wet floor of the forest, and spent nearly 40 minutes starting a fire, for all the available wood was not only wet, but rotten. We poured on kerosene and the white sap we had gathered, threw on armloads of palm fronds, and were at last able to drink hot soup from the pot I had been carrying. Vicente wanted to build a sleeping hut. which he no doubt could have done well, but neither Barbara nor I had the energy to chop the sticks he needed. We were exhausted from getting firewood with a blunt machete. The moon was bright, and the hut did not seem nearly so important as it later turned out to be. We all lay down on the poncho and spread Barbara's blanket over us. There were no mosquitoes, the moon shone beautifully through the trees, and we were thankful it was not raining. Suddenly, out of the silence, Barbara said, "Oh, I say, there are all sorts of huge snakes out here." "Do you see any?" I asked. "No, but I'm sure they're about." I knew they were, and we tried for a while to keep the fire going, but ran out of wood and settled for keeping the burning lantern hung up on a tree. I slept a little, but was awakened by Barbara's soft English voice again out of the dark. "Oh, I say, it's beginning to rain." Big drops were hitting hard on the wide, heavy leaves around us, and soon were making so much noise we had to shout to hear one another. We got up and covered what we could of our things. My linguistic materials were safe in my cowhide saddlebag. Then changed the blanket and poncho around, blanket on the ground, the waterproof poncho over us, and slept again. We were awakened again by Vicent's laughter. He lay between us, giggling and choking with laughter. "Whatever's so funny?" Barbara asked. He had found himself lying in a lake of water which had come through the hole in the center of the poncho. We hadn't thought of that, but there was nothing to do about it. I lay with my head under the poncho, feeling the rain on it, thinking about the spoor of jaguar that I had seen on the way, and of the wild boars the Indians had told us of shooting. I kept hearing unidentified noises, some of which turned out to be our horse moving on his tether, champing leaves, blowing. I was not afraid of anything, but I didn't want to miss anything either. Finally the dawn came, and with it the cessation of the rain. We crawled out, stiff from trying to lie in one position so as not to disturb the puddles on top of the poncho. We had a bit of chocolate for breakfast and some squashed bread, and talked of whether to continue or to go back home. We decided to go on for a couple of hours at least, sure that Soledad and company would be somewhere to be found. We blazed a trail with the machete to be sure we would be able to retrace our steps, and when after 2 hours we had found nothing encouraging and knew that the journey home would take us about 9 hours, we stopped in a tiny abandoned shelter next to a stream, the first water we had found since the previous day. We washed our grimy faces and muddy feet, made a fire, and boiled water for tea. We had no separate pot for brewing, so we dropped the tea leaves into the water, which also had in it ashes, palm splinters, and a spider. While we were resting and enjoying the tea, Blanco decided to go home. Without any warning, the horse crashed across the stream and plunged down the trail. Barbara sprinted after him. It did not occur to me that she would have any difficulty in catching him, but I did not know Blanco. When he had made up his mind that he had had enough, it was his custom to go home. Half an hour passed without a sign of them. There we were, Vicent and I, with the lantern, the pot, the machete, the saddlebags, the blanket, and the poncho. We had unloaded Blanco in order to give him a rest. He went off carrying only the saddle. We shouted for Barbara, but got no reply. We waited, listening, but heard only the wind sighing in the trees. We shouted some more, but our voices were lost in the forest. The jungle suddenly became a place of great emptiness and vastness, even a hostile place. The Indians, who had so badly let us down, seemed malicious. Even Blanco was in league with malevolent forces. What were we to do now? There was nothing to do but load the stuff on our backs and start walking. I don't know how long we walked before Vicent began to sob. He was tired, he said. He'd been stubbing his toes and stepping on thorns, and he did not know where the Señorita Barbara was. I tried to cheer him, and he managed to keep going a little longer, muffling his sobs and stumbling and muttering about those Indians and that no-good horse. All at once, we saw Barbara coming towards us, riding Blanco. He had kept a few inches ahead of her, she told us, until he felt he had proved his point, when he at last allowed her to grab the bridle. We were glad we had blazed a trail, for that part of the way took us less time than it had that morning. About 2 o'clock we came across a Colorado standing alone in the forest. He greeted us and informed us that Soledad and her crowd had decided not to go fishing after all. It was as if he were there by appointment. How in heaven's name had he known where to find us? Why had he decided to find us at all? Now, nearly 24 hours later than agreed. No explanation was offered except that he had been out hunting bravos, the name given to wild boars, and he now seemed to be waiting for us to follow him. He stepped lightly and quickly along the trail in front of us, a tall, muscular man, handsome in his paint and straight as an arrow, his gun over one shoulder, a powder pouch over the other. We had a hard time keeping up and dragging Blanco along. The Indian stayed far enough ahead so that he might have a chance at shooting game. Once, when he was out of sight altogether, we came to a fork. I thought of Paul and Silas, delivered from prison by an angel who took them to a certain street and then vanished. But almost as soon as we paused, we heard a peculiar shout. He had known that we would be baffled at that point and was waiting just beyond. At last we reached our clearing, and by 6 o'clock we were bathing in the San Miguel River. I never went into the jungle again on unknown trails without a guide.